the number one reason people give is to make a difference.
You're listening to Nonprofits Today, the podcast that showcases the incredible impact nonprofits have in our ever-changing world. The podcast that gets the pulse on today's economic, social, political, and humanitarian climate straight from frontline leaders, innovative changemakers, and courageous risk takers in our communities and around the globe. And now, without further ado, here's your host, Sarah Box.
Hey there and welcome. I'm Sarah Box, your host, and you are listening to Nonprofits Today. So today we are joined by Brian Grasso, a visionary leader whose personal experiences with charity and giving have led him to establish Simple Charity, an organization that offers philanthropic advising to empower people to give wisely. And from raising funds as a high school student to becoming the CEO of a nonprofit that navigates the complexity of philanthropy, Brian's journey is nothing short of inspirational, and he has a lot of knowledge to share with us today. So with that very brief introduction, let me welcome Brian Grasso to the Nonprofits Today podcast. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have you on the show. You come at charity from a different angle, and I think it's one that we need to think more about. But before we dive into that, could you share the story of Simple Charity and actually what inspired you to start this journey?
I would love to. So I went on a mission trip to Kenya when I was 12 years old. And while I was there, I was exposed to global extreme poverty for the first time. I remember driving out of Nairobi and seeing the slums outside of Nairobi and had this question in my 12-year-old boy brain of, there's these people here who are living the way they do because of where they were born. Meanwhile, I was from a somewhat wealthy suburb of Atlanta in a comfortable house, a stable family, a loving family, because of where I was born. And really had this deep sense at that time of the reasons that I have what I have are really because of where I was born and kind of won that lottery. And a lot of people around the world are living in global extreme poverty. And so when we look at even statistics of that, they can be rather overwhelming. But when you meet one person who is experiencing something like extreme economic poverty, that shifts the whole paradigm. And it did for me. So when I was in high school, I was also a strong Christian, and I was wrestling with how do I put my faith into action. And so that was a big piece of it for me too. And I was a part of this community, and we said we have to do something in response to the global poverty and injustices that we see around the world. So we started this club called Simple Charity, and we had a goal of raising $100,000 that we were going to give to organizations that work around the world to fight global poverty. And we got to work. We made t-shirts out of bleach that we would make ourselves for $3 and sell for $15 and give that money away. We did car washes, yard sales, anything that you can imagine, kind of grassroots on the ground. Our largest donation for the year was $2,000. We had two $1,000 donations, and the rest were small donations, mostly from high school students. And by the end of the year, we raised $61,000 for different global charities. But the year after that, I learned that half of that money that we raised actually went to a charity that may have been mismanaging their funds and deceiving donors about how they're using funds. So that learning experience for me was, okay, nonprofit, I still believe in nonprofits, but that was realizing, gosh, giving is hard. This work of finding good nonprofits to support is hard. I went to Duke University, studied economics and global health, and really wanted to learn two things while at Duke. I wanted to learn what evidence base there were for interventions that are actually helping the poor and fighting injustice. And two, I wanted to learn how institutions function and how you can actually vet institutions like nonprofits to find good ones to support.
Let's go into those two things separately, okay? So
that sounds great.
Yeah, because I love both of those topics. So let's talk about what a couple of the evidence-based interventions were that you learned about or experienced from your education and your research.
Sure. So we can take this. Do you want to take this kind of global or more domestic?
I think what your lessons are going to apply maybe differently in both locations, but um, let's just go with it and see where it leads. Okay.
That sounds great. So the interesting thing about doing work today to make a difference is that there is a fairly large body of solid studies on what works and what doesn't work. So in the global context, I think, one way to think about this is who won the Nobel Prize in economics in 2019, which was a couple named Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo. And they won the Nobel Prize in economics for their work to essentially find rigorous economics data-based solutions to poverty around the world. So they're working applied microeconomics for development. It was summarized in a book called Poor Economics, which is very good. And I think poor economics on the global scale is the best place to look for, okay, where are their actual interventions that have a great deal of evidence? And it's a great review of the literature there. But even when we're talking about domestic issues, a lot of the things that nonprofits are working on, whether it's education, whether it's fighting human trafficking, whether it's improvements in public health, there is this evidence base and a set of methodologies to discern what works. So maybe that's randomized controlled trials. Maybe that's using instrumental variables to actually be able to claim causality for a particular intervention or a difference in difference study. And so using some of these methodologies that are happening. And I think one of the things that doesn't happen enough is nonprofits and philanthropists just kind of checking in with academia and to say, hey, where is there actually data on what works? And where can we actually say there's all this unapplied data in academia within realms like economics, sociology, and political science that I think we can learn from.
Do you find ever that you got the academic viewpoint, but it hasn't been tested, it hasn't been applied, right? So the theory sounds great when you read it, like this should cause this, should have this impact, but when you put it into the community, for whatever reason, there may be a variable that couldn't have been identified or wasn't identified, that they're a little out of sync?
Absolutely. So whenever there's a study that's done, you have to ask if it has external validity. To what extent can you generalize this result across multiple? But I'll give one example of something that I am interested in and was controversial, maybe still is controversial, and that is direct cash transfers. So, when I was growing up, and I would often hear, don't just give a handout, give a hand up. The worst thing you could do for the poor is just give people cash. And there's a sense of not wanting to create dependency and entitlement, and I think there was a kind of logic there that was very common and pervasive. Well, there's a nonprofit called Give Directly that has been giving unconditional cash transfers for years now, and there's over 300 studies on the impact of these unconditional cash transfers to people in extreme poverty around the world. And essentially what all of these studies that are verified from lots of different academics in different places and in different contexts say is if you give the cash to the mom, you always have to give it to the woman, not the man. These cash transfers are not increasing the extent to which people utilize drugs and alcohol. They're not decreasing the amount to which people are working. And they essentially just make people's lives better to the point where every nonprofit working in global development context can actually kind of benchmark what they're doing against just giving an unconditional cash transfer. And I think to me, that's a counterintuitive result. But frankly, at this point, the evidence is so robust that it's really hard to argue with the sheer quantity of data. There's still elements of contextualization and things that a nonprofit don't hear me say if you want to work on poverty in your hometown, you should just give people money. That's not exactly what I'm saying. But global.
But are you saying that that's an intervention? It may not be the only, but it could be an and.
It could be an and, yes. And the best kinds of program evaluations are the best kinds of things to look for when evaluating a nonprofit is maybe a nonprofit partners with an academic institution that knows how to think through designing these studies and then actually evaluates that particular nonprofit's programs.
In context of where they're delivering.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And then you have, hey, a theory of change. Here are the inputs, the outputs, and the outcomes. You have data for your particular nonprofit. And as a funder, that's like the gold standard to look for an evidence base.
So let me ask you this, because I think even it makes perfect sense to me that you would give the money to the mom, right? Because typically, I know it's a
Yes.
but the moms are like, no, we're not buying this, we're buying that,
Yes.
or we're going to save it, right? And it doesn't take much. There's like this thing, even in America, right? Most Americans or many Americans don't even have enough cushion that if their car breaks down, they're not in peril. So it's just that trickle thing. Like you don't have a car, you don't have a lot of transportation, so you can't get to work, you can't get to the doctor, all of that goes. So sometimes the smallest changes can have a pretty big domino effect. But what I was going to ask you about the evaluation and partnering, like with a university or someone who does the studies, is do you find in the philanthropic side of it, people are willing to fund that part, or they just want to fund the program?
That is a great question. And it depends on the funder. I think my interactions with funders so far in my career, my biggest takeaway is that if you have met one funder, you have met one funder. And so I know that there are foundations that are funding these program evaluations. They want to have a strong evidence base for their programs. There are others that see some stuff like that as, quote unquote overhead, and they only want to make those restricted gifts and directly fund those programs. So I don't have any national trends to share on that. I hope that and I think overall the trend is moving towards having an evidence base.
Yeah.
And that is the right trend. And I would say the reason that is the right trend, there's lots of reasons, but a big one is that social issues are incredibly complex and unintended consequences, or even just completely, there are programs that are completely inert. I've heard of a policy once to reduce traffic accidents in Texas, and there was this road sign that was designed to make people pay attention while driving, and then traffic accidents in Texas went up because
they were
because they were distracted by the sign. So like our view is that social systems are as complex or more complex than biological systems. So what we have now is sometimes nonprofits just doing stuff. It's like going to the doctor. It's like, oh, well, let's try this medicine. That would probably work. Or let's try this. And then without the evidence base, without testing and learning, and it's actually a recipe for disaster. And a lot of work is happening in that way.
To what extent have you seen communities who use an evidence-based approach also use a co-creation approach with their community themselves? So like bringing them in for some conscious work, conscious facilitation, creating the solution using the model, right? But that fits that community. Have you seen that going on?
I have. And I think, I would love to hear your sense of the extent to which there's overlap in these approaches. I think the evidence base, I would say one other danger is to be kind of technocratic and to say that you have the evidence, you have all the right answers. And that's also not helpful. I think the best way to approach having the evidence base is actually to have a posture of humility and constant learning and evaluation, where you actually want to know what results are happening. And so that I think really aligns with the co-creation approach. And with that, as you're building this evidence base, it's qualitative and quantitative, listening to the stories of beneficiaries, of local partners and stakeholders, all of that's crucial as well. But I would love to hear your sense of that.
You know what? I am a lifelong learner, Brian. So for me, it's like, So that was interesting. We didn't expect that, but that's what happened. Um, so I've learned kind of because I've been stuck in situations where I'm thinking, okay, I don't have an answer, right? So, and I don't have an answer. I'm out there, I'm facilitating or doing something. So it's like, okay, group, let's talk about this and you guys come up with some ideas here. And then all the stuff that comes, like how could we, if you had to resolve this in the next 24 hours, what ideas do you guys have, right? And sometimes it's the simplest things, that make the biggest change. And I had a whole plan, like I was going to go through this 2-day thing with these guys this way. And I'm a non-native speaker of Spanish. These guys spoke mostly Spanish, but a dialect. So I understood what was being said, but I couldn't just go speak well. But I thought, okay, I've got the day plan. They want to get all this stuff done. And they came in and said, so I went over the agenda. I says, no, we need 2 hours for lunch. I had like 45 minutes. I said, in my head, I'm thinking, 2 hours, 2 hours. How are we going to make that? And I thought, I'm not the boss here. I'm a facilitator. So we did the 2 hours, but they came back. They'd been talking about everything while they were eating lunch and getting to see each other. We got through everything faster. That wouldn't have happened had I not actually had to deal with something, right, and ask for input. So, I mean, that's such a micro example of how getting feedback from who you are working with and their community. That would not have gone in corporate America. It would have been 2 hours. No, let's get on with it.
Right.
Which I respect. It's just a different culture. So, but I do know that there's more and more of that conversation about, the wisdom is in the room. If we can pull out, when have you guys resolved these types of problems before? What were some of your solutions, and then work on that. I do like having evidence. I do like having frameworks that have been tested. That's why I asked for you, like, what is your approach on that? Because I think if you start with a blank sheet of paper, you can wander anywhere.
Right.
And then I think, and this goes back to the work you do, you could be wasting donor money. Not because you're trying to be creative, but because you didn't have a clear idea of where you were trying or what you were trying to accomplish.
Yes, absolutely. So, and a basic tool there is a theory of change. So having a written out inputs, outputs, and outcomes, and then plans to measure all of those things so that you have a direction, and it can change over time. It should change over time in response to that. But I love your story, and I love just the example of the cultural contextualization and the human element of this. Nonprofit work is always very human and should be trust-based and slow in the right kind of way. And I think if I were to distill a theme that to me is crucial for every nonprofit and how they're constructing their culture, if they really care about impact, is they have to have humility. So humility, as even if it's not a written core value, I think humility needs to be a core value for every nonprofit and how they function. That means a willingness to change your mind and learn in response to evidence. That certainly means listening to the people that you're serving with, the people who you are serving, listening to your funders, listen to everyone. And to let, and I think this is where we see actually most, in my view, most of the issues that really come up or nonprofits are not having a substantial impact it's a lack of humility. And a challenge here is competing in this kind of donor funder, competing in this environment where you kind of have to boast about how you're changing the world to all these funders, and then have the humility to actually change your model potentially if it's not working. And so that's a tension.
It is a tension, but it's one of those tensions that sometimes makes you better.
Yes.
That's one of my favorite questions. People say, we got this new grant, we're taking this on, right? And I said, what are you getting rid of? We're going to keep doing everything. I'm thinking, did you get other capacity type? No, we think we can stretch it. And I'm going, your funder knows you can't.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with funders know, they're going, I couldn't run a business on that.
Yes, exactly.
So, but that's tough. That's a mindset thing sometimes for folks who think they're supposed to like get it all done, but without any resource in
Mm,
their, back end for continuity and making sure that they can deliver their promises.
yep.
Brian, let's talk a little bit about your work, Simple Charity, and how you help people invest in the right ways so that they can feel confident that they're not finding out their dollars were misused.
Yep. Sure. Well, a recent nationally representative study with Bank of America and the Lilly School of Philanthropy, affluent donors were asked, is your giving having the impact that you intended? And in this study, the majority of affluent donors said, I don't know. And so the study also showed that the number one reason people give is to make a difference. It's not to, save on their tax liabilities. It's not to create a legacy. So all these it turns out affluent donors are actually rather pro-social and are motivated by a mission, by making a difference, by impacting another person's life. And so I think a lot of funders are frankly stuck with, well, where do I give if I want to make this difference? And, maybe you make a large gift to a charity and then you don't hear back from them ever about your particular gift, and you get marketing materials and solicitation for the rest of your life. And so there's not this sense of this is the what you accomplished. So we want to fix that problem. So we offer a service called an impact audit. And so for folks who make a major gift to a charity, what we can do is evaluate that charity's theory of change, the evidence they have for impact, both quantitative and qualitative, and then report back to that donor, here is our third-party assessment of what your gift accomplished. And what we're trying to do there is fix this kind of feedback loop so that people can make a gift and really feel that impact that they're making and have joy in that process. I love calling people who make gifts to charities you recommend and saying, hey, this is what you accomplished. I had a client who made a gift to a charity supporting youth aging out of foster care, and we estimate that their gift and the size of the program and looking at the data, we estimated that their gift would prevent one youth aging out of foster care from becoming homeless. And it's a multi-year gift, so that's going to happen every year. Every year, you make the gift, and our estimate is that one person will not become homeless who otherwise would have. And so having that information, fixes this kind of giving process where you're actually able to kind of see the fruit of that you're throwing out, of the seeds that you're throwing out in the world. And I think that's a really important aspect of what we do. It's not all that we do, but it's a huge part of it.
I agree. Because oftentimes you donate because you want to make a difference, you want to help improve a condition or whatever the situation is on that you feel, right, that matters to you or your family. But then you don't know what happens, So I think that closing some communication is super helpful. I'm wondering, Brian, when you do that and you figure out how like that example with that one person not becoming homeless and that youth, do you also do some forecasting on, because that person's not homeless, they're not using these services, so the whole economic, there's a trickle down of this one person being in a stable environment for themselves?
We try to do that where we can find credible data. So we do our best. So when we construct theories of change for nonprofits, we include not just outcomes, but then we include long-term outcomes as another category. And so then we're looking at, okay, on average, what cost to society is there if an 18-year-old becomes homeless, or if someone is incarcerated for X number of years, or whatever that outcome is. And then we do try to calculate the long-term outcomes. The data can be
it can be wonky.
It can be wonky. It's not always there. It's not always there. And so we don't want to fake it when the data is not quite credible.
Yeah.
But that's exactly more of what we need. Just imagine how much better a place the world would be if everyone who wanted to make a difference was confident that they could. And then they when they did, they're confident that they did make a difference.
Yeah.
And
How, like, say someone's listening to this and they're going, okay, I've kind of not donated except maybe like $50 here or there occasionally, but I want to donate somewhere. And they hear this and they go, okay, I think that Brian guy might be the guy to talk to help us understand this. Are they calling you guys or are they calling the nonprofit? What is like the relationship that you're describing here?
sure. So Simple Charity offers philanthropic advising. We are looking to hire more philanthropic advisors. So if you're hearing this and you're interested in being a philanthropic advisor, I would certainly love to talk to you. If you're hearing this and you're a donor and you're interested in learning more, you can reach out to me at brian@simplecharity.org. But that relationship is one of philanthropic advising. So we have clients who we help them create a philanthropic strategy to identify nonprofits that align with their philanthropic goals, and then to understand their impact. And some of those services have fees that are suggested donations. A lot of times people can pay our fees actually out of their donor advised funds or their foundations if they have those. But we serve people, but we also want to be really generous with with the expertise we're learning. And if someone emails me and says, hey, I'm interested in work to impact foster youth, do you know anything about that? I respond to those emails and I share a handful of nonprofits. And so happy to do that as well. If you just want to pick my brain about something, happy to share any learnings that our team has. We have a team of impact analysts who are constantly evaluating nonprofits, and we have a growing database of nonprofit analytics that we leverage to support our clients.
And are those nationwide? I mean, how far is your reach, Brian?
Our clients right now are all over the place. We're working on a project for a group in Central Ohio, in Dallas, Washington, D.C., working on one project that's actually looking at 3 U.S. cities and impacting child welfare in 3 different U.S. cities. So, you know how the world is, Sarah. It's Zoom has made everything so small.
Everybody's your neighbor.
So everybody's our neighbor. Yep. So.
No, I think that's amazing. And it's such a tool. Number one, you're very personable. And so it's like when you're trying to figure out financial advising in general, right? Or you're doing books and you need to talk to someone who understands books, but you don't want to feel stupid, right? I can tell you I wouldn't feel stupid at all asking you the most dumb questions ever. I'd be like, okay, here's what I want to know. Help.
Well, so far you've only asked fantastic questions. So I don't foresee you asking any dumb questions.
Well, I'm super interested in what you do. But I want to go back to that kid at 12 years old, left Nairobi and went out and saw, even between the distances, right? Like, and you had that awareness there, but for fortune, am I, right? That could be me, but it's not. I was born here. So, what would you say to that 12-year-old today from everything you've learned?
I was not expecting this question, Sarah. This is a
I
great question.
I wasn't expecting to ask you this question. I just decided I'm interested in it. Welcome to my podcast.
I appreciate that. I think I would say that that 12-year-old boy wanted to, by the end of that trip, change the world. And in some ways, I'm still that 12-year-old boy. And so I think what I would say to that 12-year-old boy is almost advice for myself right now, too. And that is to take your time in doing this work, to take your time. Whether you're working for a nonprofit, whether you're a giver, or if you have this deep sense of, I want to improve conditions in the world for people who are vulnerable, that's a good thing. And being in a hurry to do it usually does not produce better outcomes. I have a good friend who tells me slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I think for nonprofits to hold their big, hairy, audacious goals and their big visions that they put in their strategic plans, to actually hold those things with some open hands, to acknowledge the complexity of this world, and to never rush through the process of building trust with the people with whom you need to build trust in order to do this work well. And that goes back to your story, Sarah, of how you sat for the 2-hour lunch. And slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Well, and I didn't know until I did that one day. We were meeting on a Sunday, right? That's the one day they have to go to church and meet friends. So they gave up their day to church. I mean, they went to church. We started after church. That was the other agreement. They would go long, but they had to go to church. But it was like they're giving up their one day. These are all people who work 6 days a week. And I thought, who am I? You know, they want to our lunch. We're going to do it. I'll do more work when I leave to catch up. But it was one of those humble moments. And plus I got to listen because I didn't speak a lot, but I understood. So I got to listen to some really great conversations. It was fun. So, but Brian, I want to thank you. You know, this is a new podcast for us, and I feel very personally attached to it because it is about nonprofits and philanthropy. And I have great faith in humans all over the world to be doing. I mean, you just look, we show up for each other most of the time, and we usually show up not our best selves, not always. But I think it's easy to not realize how much good is going on around us and how sometimes just a little bit of encouragement or help can lift someone else up, you know, and in this case, it's helping other nonprofits not feel alone in their work by listening to you. So I want to give you the last word as we finish up this podcast.
Well, knowing that this podcast is for nonprofit leaders, I just want to just speak a word of encouragement. I think starting a nonprofit, leading a nonprofit is one of the career pathways that you can take in the modern world that's truly adventurous. It's truly an adventure. I don't really shy away from believing it's kind of heroic. It's often sacrificial. It is not easy. And so I would just encourage all the nonprofit leaders to keep going, to take your time, to always learn, and you'll see that impact that you want to see.
Thank you. And listen, listeners, if you found value in what Brian shared today, and come on, who couldn't find value? Please share this podcast episode with a friend, but please go and rate and review it as well, because we want to share Brian's message as far as we can. And I'd like more people to connect up to the work he's doing, because I think it opens doors that might not open otherwise. So we'll see you for our next episode.
You've been listening to Nonprofits Today with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic nonprofit coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah and the Sandbox team at sarahbox.com. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible, so be sure to rate, review, and share this podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. And be sure to tune in and power up with future episodes of Nonprofits Today.